Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Theorist, here with your host, JCBotero67, and today we're taking a look at Chapter 17 of Revelations. And so this is a chapter that a lot of us have been looking forward to because we finally get to meet the killer or killers of Ciel's parents. And, we'll start from the beginning of the chapter, which was Father Spears. He was doing some investigating as to why Ciel underwent the transformation before his 21st birthday. He was looking back through some records and some books, and he couldn't find anything. Pretty much every other demon slayer before Ciel had been on point with that deadline. Again, the deadline was 11:30 p.m. that the demon slayer needed to show up to the church on his 21st birthday. And so, it's kind of 30 minutes before the birthday's over. And so he thinks that there is something more to it than, it's an early transformation, it's okay. There's something more behind that. And that's what he's trying to figure out. But it's really frustrating for him because there is nothing. And he can't find anything. And so then he hears this knock at his door, and he just tells the person to enter. And it happens to be Ciel, and so, they're talking for a little bit, and Ciel just kind of says right there, what if I'm not good enough to handle this? What if I'm not able to protect the human race as well as my father did before me? And so this is what Spears had to say about Vincent. Ciel was curious as to, how well he knew his father, but Spears told him that he only met him once, but for the most part, he knew he was a good guy, and there were other people like Father Lau, which we'll talk about later, and stories about Vincent that Spears knew through those people that Vincent really was a good guy. And so here is that quote. "Those who witnessed Vincent in battle said that he struck down the minions of hell so gracefully that it was more akin to a deadly ballet than to a slaughter. He was a heavenly force to be reckoned with. His skill with the sword a thing of unparalleled beauty and a true burden in Lucifer's side." And so this made me think back to one of the reviewers on fanfiction, one of the fellow readers of this fanfic, and that's Gargoyle. And if you recall, in the last review I mentioned she had written that Vincent would not have been that great of a demon slayer if he was killed off easily. And so she feels that he may have been betrayed. So after reading this, seeing that, he was a pretty amazing demon slayer, it's kind of not impossible because, you can't really disqualify anything. But, I think that there is more of a chance that he was betrayed. So, this is rough because I still feel that it is Sebastian or Claude. It's between one of those two for me, but, if Vincent was betrayed, then that's rough. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So I'm sticking with Sebastian and Claude, but I do like the idea of people theorizing that it was a betrayal. And moving along, Spears goes on to tell Ciel about how the parents met and, how they ended up together. And so here's a little snippet from Chapter 17. "They met, they fell in love, and it was only a matter of time before the reality of the situation was brought to the forefront. Rachel was a nun and could not marry, could not carry his children, no matter how much she loved your father. The fact still remained that she had chosen her path in life, and that was that. Well, Vincent wouldn't stand for it, and went as far to tell the Pope that he refused to produce another heir from his bloodline, and effectively destroying future demon slayers unless Rachel was released from her holy vows." So, that's an interesting, cute little love story. I did look through some of the reviews, and people were just like, whoa, we weren't expecting Rachel to be a nun. Ciel was taken by surprise, and it's interesting to see how the parents met and how they did end up together. And Vincent was so persistent on it that he was able to end up with the woman of his dreams, despite the path she had chosen for herself originally. And then Spears goes ahead and tells Ciel about the day that he met Ciel's parents, and of course the night that they were murdered. And so I saw a few reviewers also commend AnimeCujo on how she went about this point of view. It basically went to Spears' point of view. It wasn't a conversation back and forth between Spears and Ciel. We actually went back in time with Spears when he was younger, when, he was just this new guy at St. Victoria's Church. So, I also join in with my fellow reviewers and commend AnimeCujo on that, because it was really interesting to see another side of Spears, like a gentler, more anxious Spears. So, anyway, Spears is welcomed in by Father Lau, who was Vincent's holy advisor. And, he's telling him, you're gonna have a chance to meet Ciel, but the parents want to meet you before to kind of get a feel for what you're like and be able to meet the person who will advise their son when the time comes for him to be a demon slayer and, growing up. During the time that he's growing up and when he gets his wings and when he becomes a demon slayer. And so, at one point, Father Chamber walks in. Father Chamber is, of course, Aleister. And he greets Spears, and so he tells him, this isn't an easy thing to be an advisor to the next demon slayer. And so this is a snippet from 17 in which Spears kind of expresses his thoughts on this first meeting with Father Chamber. There was something off about Father Chamber. However, Spears couldn't place exactly what it was that had him wanting to get away from the man as quickly as possible. Was it the slight lilt to his voice that made every word sound like some sort of taunting remark? Or was it the white teeth that glistened behind the bright smile that seemed almost forced into place? All Spears knew was that the father put him on edge and he didn't like it. And so Father Chamber goes off. He's like, we'll see you at Mass later tonight. And Lau is leading Spears to his room, where he'll be living. And so Spears asks Lau, how'd you meet him? If you don't mind my asking. And Lau kind of notices that Spears is kind of iffy about Father Chamber. So Lau goes on to explain the following. He used to be very different, warm and compassionate, a lover of the arts. He could always find beauty in any of God's creations. Then one day, a few years ago, his nephew killed himself for no apparent reason. Maurice was his name, I think. Aleister changed after that. Gone was the kind and gentle man who I had grown up with, and in his place was who you saw today. Tragedy can do that sometimes. It can change you. And so then, after that, the Mass takes place, and from where he's sitting, Spears looks over at Father Chamber. And then Father Chamber locks eyes with him, and Spears still has this strange feeling about him. And I do want to conclude this review, or at least this part of the review, with the final two sentences. He was sure that tonight's memories would play again and again in his mind until the day he died. Unfortunately, there was no way the young priest could have ever predicted what was about to take place, and that he would have nightmares about this night for many years to come. So when I reached those last two sentences, I was like, no, we're not going to find out who the killer is until next chapter. It turns out that the chapter was much longer, and so AnimeCujo had to cut it short, and so we won't get to meet the killer until the next chapter. So it's technically part 2 of chapter 17, but I guess it is chapter 18, in which we will finally get to meet the killer, or killers. So that was what AnimeCujo mentioned in her author's note, and then she also had this to say. So you all had awesome theories as to who kills Vincent and Rachel. I mean, really, I think you guys should be writing this instead of me, because your ideas are way better than mine. It might look like Aleister Chamber is the killer, but appearances can be deceiving, and nothing is ever that simple in my stories. So after reading that, I got to thinking, when I was reading chapter 17, I was almost convinced that Aleister had something to do with it. I wasn't necessarily thinking that he was the killer, but I think that he either helped the killer, or he was mind-controlled by the killer to kill Ciel's parents. Then again, he could have been mind-controlled throughout the whole thing. Like, he may have been mind-controlled in assisting the mastermind behind the murders. Or he chose to help out willingly. There was also a reviewer, Gargoyle, who said oh, I think Aleister may have sold his soul to the devil. So there's also that possibility. But you know what struck me the most in the story was the mention of Aleister's nephew killing himself. You know, maybe Aleister's nephew was killed to convince Aleister to help out the killer, or the mastermind behind the murders. But like AnimeCujo said, appearances are deceiving. He might not have anything to do with it, but I really find him suspicious. So I think he has some part to play in these murders. And then I did want to point out a review that Kuro Otaku 292 left. She was saying that Aleister couldn't be the killer because he's human, and that if Ciel's parents were torn apart and torn into pieces, that it's impossible for a human to have done that. My thought is, maybe she could be right. Aleister could be human, but we don't know that he's necessarily human. You know, he could be half angel, half demon. I don't know. I mean, yeah, a half demon becoming a father, that's kind of odd, but I mean, nothing is impossible. It's like Greed from FMA says. Nothing is impossible. I mean, Aleister could be a demon, he could have sold his soul to the devil, and that's why he completely changed character. You know, I was even thinking that the nephew story may have been something made up. You know, maybe he sold his soul to the devil, or because the sudden change of character, I mean, you can't just switch characters out of the blue. So, you know, maybe the nephew is just kind of like a cover story. But, like I said, we'll see in the next chapter where we will find out who the killer or killers are. So, thanks for joining me, and I will catch you in the next review.